Conversations in Color. Brought to you in part by the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. Charles Deslondes and Manuel Andry. The Legacy of Oppression and Freedom.
My name is Christopher Harder. I'm the Interim Executive Director at the Amistad Research Center. Would like to welcome everyone here to the George and Joyce Wein Jazz and Heritage Center. We would like to thank the Jazz and Heritage Foundation for hosting us this evening and allowing us to share in this collective space. Tonight we're gathering as part of Amistad's continuing Conversation in Color series, which is a way for us to gather scholars, activists, artists, to talk about their work and its influence on social change. This is also part of a larger project called Liberation Vibrations, and I would like to ask our partners from New Orleans Airlift, Delaney Martin, and Monique Moss from Third Eye Theater to share a little bit of information about that before we begin tonight.
My name is Monique Moss. I'm Artistic Director of Third Eye Theater, Interdisciplinary and Improvisational Performance Company. And to give you all just a little bit of context about the larger work that we all collaborated on, I would like to share just a little bit of information.
Hi, everybody. My name is Delaney Martin. I'm an artist and also the founder of New Orleans Airlift and also our flagship project, Music Box Village, which might be more familiar to some. It's my honor to be working with Monique and our whole organization, also with Amistad, and also with Dr. Kara Teolich, former executive director, as a person and as an artist on this project too. It began because we got a random call from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of all people, to go to Congo and sort of work some of our public art magic in some context. It was a strange invitation. It was somebody who just worked at the Gates, saw us, found us, and made a connection. And it was an immediately problematic thing that we needed to involve Native New Orleanians.
Us, it's not her and I. This is before Delaney and I actually met.
Okay, yes, us being the New Orleans Airlift, a transplant white-led organization here in the Deep South. And so this invitation was both exciting and deeply problematic, and we called on our great collaborators from the Native New Orleans community, people like Sharice Harrison Nelson, people like Kelly Love Jones, people we worked with and trusted, to say, how do we approach this project? And everybody agreed we needed to have co-leaders, Native New Orleanian co-leaders from the start. And through a process that took us up to March 2020, when we selected Monique and Kara to be our partners, and then of course could not get on a plane to go anywhere near Congo. It was the pandemic.
And so after meeting with Delaney and all the members of Airlift, I just wanted to share some of the work that I had connecting the Congo to New Orleans. My research had been rooted in finding out those cultural and historical and spiritual connections. And so one of my papers that was in writing while a museum studies candidate at SUNO in the museum studies program was centered on looking at the large collection of Congolese artifacts that they house. I also ended up partnering with Crew de Carnaval, which is an organization that was founded by Arcade Fire in order to raise funds for Haiti. And so I worked with them on developing that parade in order to support our brothers and sisters there. Then in 2018, I traveled to the Congo with Tito Sampa and Jean-Claude Bize Sampa, and hence, obviously, had a fantastic experience in that space, being in Africa, in the center, at its heart. And then, when working with New Orleans Airlift and Amistad Research Center, Dr. Kara Teolich invited Papatitos and I to begin creating what's called the Mbongi Circle, which is essentially a circle of community leaders and participants in order to solve and resolve issues. And so that was the beginning of a really beautiful relationship with Amistad and New Orleans Airlift in having these Mbongi circles to discuss issues like racial justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and so forth. And so we worked with their board and full staff.
Yeah, so in essence, after the first rush of the craziness of the pandemic, Gates let us keep the money, and we regathered and said, what can we do? George Floyd had, of course, also had happened during this period when we had taken a break. And so it was incredible to start an art project, but base it in racial trainings, not just between artists, but with our staff board, wider collaborators. And to think about a project here in New Orleans and to have this practice of Mbongi, which we now use for board retreats, for collaborator circles, to have it enter our life through the teachings of Monique and Papatito Sampa and shape our work, not just our work, our whole global organization. I always like Intuit. It's just another kind of facilitator, right? And it's so important to look at a Western circle as a facilitation. So anyways, but we were embarking on an art project after all, and it didn't have to be at Music Box Village, which is our radically collaborative village of musical architecture, a place of artist-built musical houses where we invite the public in to play with them and world-class musicians to perform them. But Kara and Monique said, oh no, we really want it to be at Music Box. And Monique said, what do you know about the land? And I knew a little bit about the land. We had a great relationship with the former guy who owned the land, and we were lucky to be able to move into this land and to be its occupiers. And it didn't take long for me to find out another bit of interesting history when I'm looking for something about maybe some sort of racial moment that might have happened in this project that wants to be about racial reconciliation. And I look at the 1834 map, which is the second map after 1786, and there's the Ursuline Convent. Our property is along the Industrial Canal, so that was obvious. And what is next door? Andry. It took me about 2 seconds to be like, oh my God. And then I looked on the other side of the canal, and it's Charles Deslondes Street, and all of a sudden, it was just like a shiver going through me. This was not a discovery. Historians knew that he moved to the Ninth Ward, but it was a revelation for our organization, our white-led organization. It was a revelation to say, oh wow, we're the occupiers, this is our land ancestry, and now for the first time as a transplant, I feel caught in a channel of history that has become the seed of this project that we are sharing.
Some like to call it irony, I like to call it divine intervention. I've worked with Mr. Leon A. Waters for 10 years. Leon A. Waters has been the eminent scholar, historian, and descendant of the history of the 1811 slave revolt. You can applaud. And so there is a connection, and there's a lot more to the story, okay? So on October 8th, we will be doing what I'm calling a culminating cultural performance practice. This is not a performance with an audience and actors. This is culture relived, coming from the history of the ancestors. And so we'll end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monique and Delaney, for this background information on Liberation Vibrations. Before we introduce our speakers tonight, I'd also like to thank the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities for sponsoring this and subsequent talks as part of this series. Tonight, we're very fortunate to have two eminent scholars, Dr. Laura Rosanne Adderley and Leon A. Waters, to talk about the 1811 revolt. Dr. Adderley is Associate Professor of History at Tulane University, where she's also affiliated with the Africana Studies Program and the Stone Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. She researches and teaches in African American history, comparative African diaspora history, and Caribbean history. Her main interests lie in the history of Black enslavement and its aftermath, especially in the 19th century. She's currently working on a book tentatively titled Practicing Emancipation, Black Lives, Atlantic Abolition, and Everyday Politics of Freedom. A native of New Orleans, Leon A. Waters is a historian, publisher, and social activist. He serves as the board chairperson of the Louisiana Museum of African American History and is manager of Hidden History LCC, a publishing, touring, and research company. Mr. Waters is a publisher of the book On to New Orleans, Louisiana's Historic 1811 Slave Revolt, the definitive account of the largest revolt of enslaved individuals in the United States, which happened in St. John the Baptist, St. Charles, and Orleans parishes, and is the focus of our talk tonight. Please help me welcome Mr. Waters and Dr. Adderley.
Good evening. This is a presentation that Mr. Waters and I worked on together about a year ago during the pandemic, originally on Zoom, so I'm extremely grateful to be able to have an enhanced and revived version of it in person, and I'm grateful to all of our sponsors for this. One of my part of the presentation is to talk about the relationship between how we do history and in what spaces and what stories we choose to tell, and why the story of the 1811 rebellion is so poorly told, so poorly taught, and what all of our roles collectively are in changing that. One, I will talk a lot, which I frequently do not do, about my own journey as a professional historian through halls in which they pretended to be telling Black history and teaching Black history and talking about Black enslavement, but in fact did something quite different. And while Mr. Waters and I have not formally worked together, we have worked alongside each other in various ways over the past 25 years that I, as an immigrant to New Orleans and someone whose job in this city is in an institution that is often quite removed from the city, and one of the things I want to talk about is essentially, what our relationship as so-called knowledge producers and the producers of Black knowledge in institutional spaces, and what that does, what that has done to slave rebellion, and where the 1811 rebellion in particular fits into that. So I do apologize to my hosts and all of you, because I'm the reason we're late. I have about sort of 15 minutes of that bigger conversation before we'll turn to Mr. Waters and the 1811 rebellion in particular. I have 3 what I call introductory things to say, although they're long, and then 6 really things that I want to say. This is the biggest introductory comment is that this presentation was originally conceived by the Charles Deslondes chapter of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, often referenced by its acronym ASALH. Mr. Waters will speak in detail about Charles Deslondes, about the freedom movement that he led. One of the things that may not be obvious to people not familiar with ASALH is that one of the things, and this is a national organization, that we are asked to choose a name for the chapter that is some distinguished figure in African American history, so that your chapter can be identified by its name, not the New Orleans chapter or the South Louisiana chapter, but choosing someone's name. We are a revived chapter, and our final 2 choices for what our renamed chapter would be were Charles Deslondes and Queen Mother Audley Moore. Moore, who some of you know, was born in New Iberia and eventually became a critical Black nationalist leader among Marcus Garvey's followers in this city before continuing her activism in New York and other parts of the country before her death in the 1990s. Now, ASALH was founded by Carter G. Woodson in 1915. Let's see if I'm clever enough to move that myself. I am. Look at that. And this association was for the promotion of the study of African American history and the publication, meaning both written and in presentations, of research on African American experience. And the founding of this association, which is the origins of this presentation, had many reasons. One of them was certainly that the white-dominated historical profession at the time had little interest in lengthy and in-depth study of Black experience. And I believe that all of the meetings of its main professional association, the American Historical Association, of which Woodson was a member and of which I am a dues-paying member, our professional association, were in any case segregated. So even if you wanted to, say, walk into that space, Woodson, who had a PhD from Chicago and had written in European and U.S. history and had all of the normal credentials for entering into that space, even if he wanted to change it, he wasn't free to change their public meeting space. But separate from segregation and wanting an association, one of the things that Woodson wanted was that Black history be pursued seriously and professionally in those spaces, but also that serious and archive pursuit and publication, both in writing and in public, were things that should be engaged in Black communities beyond formal academic institution. All right? And this was not just because in Woodson's, often called the father of Black history, but celebrated for reasons that are a little bit different from this, mostly Black History Month. It wasn't just that most of those formal institutions remained closed to African Americans. I tell my mostly white students up at Tulane all the time, I said, you do realize that in your grandparents' lifetime, what I do walking into this room to teach you was not legal. But Woodson wasn't primarily concerned with, well, those spaces are segregated, so we must have community history because we can't be in those formal spaces. No. It was a broader principle, all right, about serious community engagement with serious historical research, all right? And to the present, ASALH remains an association that seeks to combine participation from students and instructors from high school to university and widespread interested community members. ASALH in its founding and its identity essentially says that serious historical pursuits for Black communities must be everybody's practice, all right? And we have to work, and we have done a terrible job, all right, in general, in fulfilling that mission. Not we personally in this room, but as a society, if you look at what the serious practice of history is about, and one of the things why Amistad as an archive is engaged in this kind of conversation is to be a part of that process. I'm not sure whether New Orleans previously had an ASALH chapter or what its name, but it must be said that it is Director Kara Oledge, our former director, who's been invoked here once already, who was determined, all right, that Amistad could take some leadership in reviving the chapter here. And the chapter name was related to certainly Woodson's missions about talking about Black history, and he was interested in any and all Black history. All right, but he was also interested, and this is the part of my context setting here today, Woodson was especially interested in talking about Black history that was ignored or misrepresented in wider conversations in the United States. One of the things that I say about the department in which I work in at Tulane is that it wasn't that I was the first person hired at Tulane to teach full-time African diaspora history. There was an Africanist, Dr. Cora Presley, who also was an Amistad person, who was an Africanist before. It wasn't that Black people weren't discussed, it's the way they were discussed and in what context, and that essentially we learned a lot about the institution of slavery and not about the intellectual and political and cultural capacity of African Americans under that oppression. And Woodson was especially interested in talking about things that are misrepresented, erased. As recently as 2 days ago, all right, someone who is a formally trained U.S. historian asked me whether or not it was correct that the 1811 uprising was the largest anti-slavery uprising to take place in the territory that is now the United States. And they weren't being, negative about it. They were like, this is true? And I don't know this as someone with decades career. She's like, how does that not come up? Not that this wasn't a slavery history expert, and I will say a little bit more about the expert history of slavery in a second. So the answer to that question is yes. All right, and at minimum, every time we host an event as the Deslondes chapter, that's one of the things we get to say is we get to invite people to talk about this incredibly important event that is remarkably overlooked. Now, the second introductory comment that I want to include before talking more closely to thinking about slave uprisings and about the enslaved concerns is the way that Louisiana is often marginalized and put to one side in U.S. history, all right? And it's definitely true that much of one learns about the history of the United States leaves Louisiana out. Now, this has some legitimate historical reasons, meaning that the invasion and colonization of this region was mostly by French and Spanish groups in contrast to the invasion of most of the eastern seaboard by English groups. So people essentially said, well, the places where, that Constitution or whatever was written. But the setting aside of Louisiana also has wholly illegitimate roots of very different kinds. All right, one is, and this is something that we are familiar with in the present, as a smaller state, a poorer state, the size of its economy, so it's often a casual excuse of assuming that, well, nothing important happens down here. The important history of the United States, the things that matter in both black history and in national history, obviously happened somewhere else. I've actually had people argue with me about the facts of the 1811, just on the basis they know nothing, not that they knew some contrary facts, that it couldn't be true that this had happened here. Even worse, there is a widespread and largely false idea that French enslavement of Africans and people of African descent was somehow less violent or less racist or generally not as bad as slavery enforced in the 13 English colonies or in the early 1800s in other southern states after so-called Anglo-Americans arrived. Related to this latter idea, there's an equally problematic idea that the greater New Orleans area is somehow less anti-black in its history than other parts of the United States or the US South. It's a conversation for a different day to discuss the misleading and dangerous popularity about the idea that there's some lesser anti-blackness. It is an idea that is hard to destroy. All right, and we often sort of compare, it's widespread in Latin America, it's not just in this country, that, well, there were some really racist, really bad slaveholders over there. It is important for today, though, to recognize that European invasion, murder, dispossession of indigenous people, and the enslavement of Africans in southern Louisiana was no less violent or brutal or white supremacist than it was anywhere else. And once Louisiana became a part of the United States, those in power embraced their opportunities to enrich themselves and the United States with this kind of almost indescribable exploitation of people of African descent. So as Mr. Waters will discuss in detail, what was being challenged here in 1811 was central to the United States and world history as much as to local history. This isn't an interesting slave rebellion that had some kind of local context, and the marginalization of Louisiana has a lot of roots. The last preliminary comment that I want to make, and as I said, I called 3 preliminary and 6 substantive. The 6 substantive are going to be quick. Has to do with talking about slave uprisings generally, about violence. All right, and there is a long history of white distress and discomfort with talking about the justified nature of violent rebellion against slavery. This dates back to the era of slavery itself. White abolitionists, this is the anti-slavery movement, as small as it was, and they were always an extreme minority, all right? They debated the quote, problem of anti-slavery violence. All right, how to talk about this? If we're going to persuade white people that Africans enslaved deserved freedom, oh boy, if they attack the slaveholders, how do we discuss this? Jalene Matthews' book, which is one of my favorite, came out about a decade ago, was the first book to really engage this in detail. It is a book about white abolitionists who don't want to talk about black violence against slavery. These are the minority voices that said they opposed slavery, they supported black rights, or at least some black rights. They did a lot of propaganda about how abusive slavery was. All right, this was their business, to explain to people that slavery was abusive and murderous and violent and unjust. All right? But they were much less comfortable saying, if slaveholding society and colonialism is doing brutal and unspeakable things to black people, then those captives have the legitimate right to resist that brutality. All right, and that's 10 years ago. That's the first, major publication that says, look at you, the abolitionists didn't want to talk about this. A more recent book that I commend, and Kelly Carter Jackson has a new book coming out too, is a study of the way black abolitionists in the United States took on this question, and they, contrary to white abolitionists, recognized the need that it made no sense to suggest, especially in the 1800s, and I'll get to long time in a minute, all right, especially in the face of such intractable resistance by anyone in power, even abolitionists, to end slavery, that somehow to suggest that nonviolent, in gentle quotation marks, political persuasion was the only path forward. All right, these facts have been all over archival records for centuries. All right, this was not a secret. Especially the British abolitionist stuff, it's all over it's been over the internet practically since there was an internet. And it is only relatively recently, all right, in the past 50 or so years, in the spirit of Woodson and people like Mr. Waters' work, has been taking that head on. You just don't talk about this. Why do you not talk about it? So we don't, when I first learned about the 1811 uprising, it was when I arrived in Louisiana, after literally, and this is in some ways the most important thing I will say, when I arrived in Louisiana, having heard not one word about the 1811 uprising, the largest slave rebellion in U.S. history, I had at that moment literally 10 full years of formal education after high school, all right? 10 full years, all right? That's 3 degrees, all right? Most of my education focused on the history of black enslavement, all right? And this critically important event never came up. All right, I met when I came here, and I was interested, and I was all and about trying to meet people. I met a not very progressive person who was a tour guide at one of these sites on the River Road, and even this was not a person particularly attuned to African American history. And even they said to me, all right, and I quote them regularly to this day. So just an ordinary person doing a very limited job dealing with any kind of black history at all. And she was older than I am. And she said, this country, all right, we have a lot of interest in freedom fighters, many of whom were suspect. I came here in 96, so we'd just come after the 1980s where anyone who said they were a freedom fighter could get the CIA to give them money. We have precious little interest in the most important people who fought for their actual freedom. All right, this is a country that defines itself on its love of freedom and literally spends untold amounts of money of our tax dollars on all kinds of suspect characters who call themselves freedom fighters, all right? And they have little interest in the people who fought for their actual freedom, and more importantly, all right, for any seeking of a bigger understanding of the freedom that black people sought, that is a bigger definition of freedom than this so-called freedom-loving country has ever really engaged. My quick historical points, which are the backdrop to 1811, and they are quick. Yes, I'm not going to run through it, all right? I just want you to look from 1492 to 1888, all right? I have been told more times than I can count, more recently by the president of the American Historical Association, that African Americans are too concerned with identity politics, and this is why we're obsessed with the history of slavery, blah, 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 blah. We're obsessed, all right? We're obsessed with that history because it defines the whole history of everything in the Americas from 1492 up to 1888. As early as the 1520s, all right, as early as the 1520s, you have African armed rebellion against this European invasion and the values that have defined the society, that have made our governments. That's one thing that I want to highlight. It's everywhere, all right? The second thing that I want to highlight is if you look all the way down to 1834, there are, and I will talk in a minute, I'll say a quick thing about the Haitian Revolution. Haitian Revolution is black-led. It is not until the 1830s, 330 years in, that you have any one of these colonial powers who actually enact, we will end slavery and make it stick. There were some things, so I tell my students all the time, I ask the question, every time I teach the history of slavery, who thought that the enslavement of black people was an absolute moral and political evil and the government at all costs should end it? black people themselves. Everybody else debating. There's a wonderful new book by Yesenia Berrigan that was the slide I missed about gradual abolition. So you have all these things that happen in northern states around the American Revolution. That's the thing, number one, to keep in mind, all right, that this is hundreds of years of dedicated commitment, that this is what we build our lives on. I have 3 minutes. All right. The other thing about this chronology is we don't spend a lot of time in this country talking about sort of our Latin American neighbors. Slaveholders did. All right. You go into, sort of 1700s and 1800s newspapers, and they are constantly, they're like, oh my God, there's literally, I've read this in a Boston newspaper, like, there's a lot of free black people walking around in Lima, Peru. Are we concerned about that? And if we're going to have free blacks here, this is around the time of the American Revolution, maybe we should look to see how it goes and what they are like. All right. So it is since the United States became so powerful in the 20th century that they ignored their neighbors. Slave power, they knew who their friends were. All right, and they wanted to know how slave power was enforced. This was a regional and global system. And that is super, super, super important to remember in terms of particularly the philosophy of the leaders of what happened here in 1811. Other thing I will say, and 1.5 minutes. There's 2 books that I have had to hide from my colleagues when I was a much younger person. I think that, yes, Herbert Aptheker was marginalized because he was a communist in the mid-20th century. But he wrote a book called American Negro Slave Revolts in the mid-1900s and was considered sort of, you're a lefty suspect person, all right? And he basically said, this is important, you must study this black resistance. And people suspected that he said that, because you're a communist. Not because it's factual. All right, and not because the whole system was founded on it. All right, and so it's very, very recently. All right, the other book that I was a little bit like, and it wasn't like you could get through college until, without, now there's lots more writing about it, but it was like, sort of leftist extremist. And I hate when people talk about people as extremists, because sometimes the so-called extreme is correct. All right, it is true, and this is sort of of my sort of final points. There is a larger number of mass violent uprising against slave societies elsewhere in the Americas. It was more frequent, but I put that chronology on the left here. It's all over U.S. history as well. And one of the things that people are fond of saying is there was, it's everywhere. All right, and I won't go through it here, but at every moment in the building of the United States, everybody in slavery studies knows that slave codes became more harsh after a massive rebellion in South Carolina, and they literally said, we must be more cruel and more violent if we're going to make the kind of money we want to make. These aren't secret unknown facts of that history. The most important of these is the Haitian Revolution. All right, and one of the things that it is only in the past 25 years that there is widespread academic conversation in formal spaces that this is the most important event, all right, in Western history in the past 300 years. All right. I used to get a lot of cheap points for being isn't she clever, for bringing it up. All right. It's like it's such an obvious thing, and more critically, even when deep into the 90s, there was a whole conversation about, the French Revolution happened, and how did those revolutionary ideas about freedom from thinkers in France influence the enslaved without engaging, all right, the black thinkers themselves, all right, among the enslaved. This was a standard narrative, even among people who talked about the Haitian Revolution, all right, when enslaved people overthrew slavery and French colonialism, that a standard narrative was to try to figure out how the revolutionary ideas of freedom got inside the minds of black people. That was a standard way of talking about it. All right, so the conversation that we're having today about the 1811 rebellion is about what it means to try to change conversation. All right, and as someone who I've devoted a formal professional career to this, so I have seen, all right, what actual enforced silence looks like. Thank you.
All right, what I'd like to do is, I've spoken on this subject many times over couple of decades. And I'm going to do something a little different today. Many times when I've spoken about this subject, I have a genealogical chart that shows my paternal ancestry. It shows the names of my family members that were living in 1788, 1789. And when you look at that genealogical chart, I'm able to trace those ancestors who were there in St. Charles Parish and St. John the Baptist Parish, who witnessed or had been impacted by the revolt led by Charles Deslondes. I'm not able to determine precisely if this relative was one of the warriors, one of the revolutionary fighters or not. The history of black revolutionaries is a history where the records, the documents, journals, all the normal literary pieces are not there. They don't exist. So we have to rely on the records of what I call the oppressor class. We have to methodically study this to be able to extract the objective truth from these criminal records. So what I'm going to focus on today, I'm going to focus on what was the aim of the revolt. Hollywood, movie makers, over the years I've been approached by so many fake opportunists, people out of New York City and California wanting to make a movie on this subject. And the movies always involve how we're going to have sex scenes, how we're going to show battles, how we're going to have people fighting. It's never about the aim. It's never about the intellectual brilliance of these people. How is it that these people who are called savages, as early as this book came out, second edition, 1935, this was the book used in public high schools to teach sixth graders Louisiana history. The word Negro is used twice in the entire book. And the first sections of the book talks about the savages living here, the indigenous peoples in Louisiana, before the slaves from Africa are brought here. So we're not able to go to materials, records that's written by us, produced by us, for us to get the most scientific understanding of this history. That be what it is. This presentation is going to focus primarily on the aim, and it's going to focus on what were the influencers that helped shape the revolutionary vision of Charles Deslondes and his comrades. So I want you to keep that in mind. The aim of this revolt was to establish a second independent black republic with its own sovereign state. Most times when I say that, white people get upset. They start shaking. Black republic, damn, all no black people? What, y'all prejudice? You don't like white folks or something? I don't have time, and I'm getting too old to get into debates and discussions about that. I would ask people who are really genuinely serious, just study the facts. Study, even examine the objective records by the oppressor class. I said objective records, that was a mistake. The records of the oppressor class. First, we want to do this. Let's see now. There's going to be several very important influencers that helped shape the revolutionary vision of Charles Deslondes. Dr. Adderley, click forward.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now there's going to be about 4 influencers, major influencers, that shaped the revolutionary vision of Charles Deslondes. In the 1750s, there was a number of philosophers out of France. They were utopian philosophers. They were philosophers who articulated utopian views of how to address the question of freedom, equality, etc. They introduced these ideas, utopian ideas. What is a real fair society or just society? Can we have a society where oppression is gotten rid of, where we don't have a class of people that are propertied and the masses of people are impoverished? One of these men's name was A.T. Gabriel Morelli. This gentleman, along with two other guys, Mr. Gabriel Barnard de Mabley and Simon Nicholas Henry Linguet, they would popularize the idea that if we could sit down with those in charge, perhaps through reason, perhaps through persuasion, we could be won over to the idea that they should stop abusing people, stop being a thief of other people's labor, and together we can erect a more just, equal society. So they were what you call, in the beginning of the introduction of socialist ideas, utopian. Karl Marx, about 100 years later, would explain that that is impossible. That the ruling classes of any country are by definition thieves or oppressors, and their exploitation and oppression cannot be ended through the art or the skill of sitting down being reasonable. No, it's going to require force to remove them from the political position they occupy in society. And that removal is called revolution. So these gentlemen's ideas are being popularized to get around, they travel around the world. Mr. Simon Nicholas Henry Linguet, in particular, by the way, he testified in front of the National Assembly of France saying that the people, the revolutionaries in Haiti, have a right to free themselves by force. It was surprising learning that when he was articulating a different view for many years, that we should be able to get this accomplished without force. France executed him. The ruling powers in France say, look, we're not going to have this kind of talk anyway, okay? Now, since you've somewhat gone over the other side sympathetically, you got to go. They executed him. But my point is, these ideas are getting around. That's one of the influencers. The next influencer is that there's going to be a tremendous amount of revolutionary resistance throughout the Caribbean and parts of the United States and parts of Latin America. Before 1811, there were literally scores and scores of revolts throughout the Caribbean. One could say the Caribbean was constantly on fire, in flames. For instance, in Veracruz, 1570, you had a leader named Yanga. In 1730, in Jamaica, there was a major revolt. In 1733, the Danish St. John Virgin Islands, another revolt. In Stono, many people know of that. In South Carolina, 1739. Then you had in Jamaica, 1760, Tacky's Rebellion. In the Bahamas, brother named Abaco, 1787. Here in Point Coupé, Louisiana, 1795. In Carousel, 1795. In Gabriel's Rebellion, Virginia, 1800. But besides just these rebellions, there were other forms of resistance, militant revolutionary resistance, taking the forms of arsons, skirmishes, fights, poisonings, maroonings, strikes, slowdown, runaways. All of these things happened before 1811. My point is this: the descendants of these incidents, these rebellions, would learn, take in, be taught the experiences, the lessons of what struggles took place prior to them. So that's influencer number 2. The next influencer would be this. Laws are considered legal frameworks to be governed by. For most modern countries, they have what's called a constitution, which lays out the do's and don'ts, your obligations, etc. From the 1700s up to the victory of the Haitian Revolution, 1804, there were numerous oppressor laws that will be in struggle with the future laws of the newly freed. Here in Louisiana, as early as 1724, the legal framework was the Code Noir, extremely evil document. It outlawed Jewish people. It made Catholicism the only religion by law. And it listed the various punishments that an enslaved person would suffer if he got out of line. From cutting your ears off to being torched with the fleur-de-lis branded on the back of your shoulder. There's nothing great about that symbol throughout the city of New Orleans, but most people aren't aware of its real true history. So it's on every football Saint helmet every Sunday, as well as other places around the city. I equate it with the Nazi flag led by Adolf Hitler. The next law, now this is a real evil document, 1787, United States Constitution. Why do I say that? I don't want nobody to think I'm un-American. Oh, he said the 1787 United States Constitution. Man, criticize the Constitution. If you have never actually taken the time, seriously, to study this, this is a bundle of compromises between different sections of the oppressor class. Some of the most important ideas are cloaked, from the 3/5 clause to the reasoning which would lead to the international slave trade ban, to the Fugitive Slave Act. If you take the time and go by section, you will see that this is the document of the oppressor class. The oppressor class being the millionaires, billionaires that run America today. And as you go down, each one of these constitutions or declaration would slightly improve the quality of life. At the top there is the, in 1791, following the struggle going on in France, the Declaration of Rights of Man, 1789, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen came into being. When you take your time to get acquainted with that, you're going to learn that it's slightly better than the Constitution of the United States, 1787. However, it's a declaration that's only for men who own property, improving their quality of life. When that came into being, the declaration was in the class interest of 4 million male French property owners. It excluded 29 million women and men. What kind of freedom is that? Equality is that? Later, a radical by the name of Olympia de Gouges would strive to struggle against this, and she and her team introduced the ideas in 1791, the Declaration of the Rights of Women and Citizen. But it had limitations. because it was limited to the masses of women. I'm saying it was limited just to women with property. And the majority of women, it excluded. So both of these documents, these declarations, will uphold class interests of the property holders, deny the mass numbers of women, and absolutely deny the enslaved. That's not even mentioned in either declarations. Later, the U.S. Slave Trade Act, 1794, 1800, and 1803. I would encourage everybody to go and just read it yourself. Don't take my word. You will see there, those acts just place gradual limits on the international slave trade until the international slave trade was finally adopted in Congress, March 1807, which became effective January 1st, 1808. For many people that have not taken the time to research this, they think it's a result of people demonstrating, agitating that this should come to an end. No. Go back to the U.S. Constitution. When you read the U.S. Constitution, you get to a certain part in it, it makes it very clear. The southeastern colonies of the United States made a compromise with the northeastern colonies. Sorry, the southeastern colonies made an arrangement with the northeastern colonies. The southeastern colonies took the position, look, we'll go it alone. We'll start our own republic. So they compromised. They wanted to keep all 13 colonies together. So the deal was this: we'll keep chattel slavery for 20 years. Okay? 20 years. Then after that, we'll stop. 1787 U.S. Constitution was ratified, was confirmed. Do the math. 1787 and 20 is what? 1807. March 1807, Congress adopted the international slave trade ban, which became effective January 1st, 1808. Did it end slavery? No. It exploded. It exploded because you don't have to build ships anymore. Rhode Island, Connecticut are the main places where to build ships. You don't have to hire a captain or a crew to cross the Atlantic Ocean anymore. You don't have to go to the bank, get that money, or make a loan to cover that ship, to cover that crew, to cover or ensure the human cargo you're going to bring back. Because now the black female is going to be turned into a black baby machine. So it exploded. And up to 1.5 million people will be brought from the northern southern states, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Missouri, coming down that river, which led to the famous saying, "Soul down the river." It's really important, I'm serious, it's really important people take the time and the energy to meticulously study these documents, because you don't see a short-term plan, you see a long-term plan, lifetime plan of oppression. All right. The next one, 1804, Congress will pass a new law that led to the dividing of the old colonial area of Louisiana Purchase into two parts. The northern part will become Louisiana Territory, and the southern part will become Orleans Territory, with New Orleans becoming the territorial capital. So when you look at this map, after this was purchased, coughed up by Napoleon from the blows of the Haitian Revolution, the United States will divide the territory up into two parts. What you know today is Arkansas up to Canada became Louisiana Territory. And what you know today is the state of Louisiana became Orleans Territory. And New Orleans would be made the territorial capital of Orleans Territory, led by a man named William C.C. Claiborne. The longest street in the city is named after that racist oppressor of our people, who would make a fortune in sugarcane profits, and his great-great-great niece will become the first woman, liberal woman, to represent us in Congress, Lindy Claiborne Boggs. I hope you're making the connections. Now, The third, or rather the fourth social conditions, the fourth influencer is going to be the social conditions of super exploitation and brutal oppression that the enslaved people suffered from here in Orleans Territory. Simply what we mean there is this. Charles Deslondes and his team went through certain experiences here. Some of his team members came from Haiti. He was brought from Haiti. We do not know his birth or his country of origin. We do know that at some point he was brought there, probably from Africa. But some came from other Caribbean islands, and some came as a result of the domestic slave trade. By the time 1811 happened, the domestic slave trade business was going on for at least 3 years. So through their own experiences on St. Charles, St. John the Baptist parishes, through their own experiences on plantations in America, and through their own experiences on plantations in the Caribbean, this collage of people was brought here. They were brought here because many of the slaveholders were fleeing the Haitian Revolution, came to Louisiana as a French colony, and brought their human chattel slavery with them to restart their businesses up the Mississippi River. So these four make up what I call the influencers that will play a role in shaping the revolutionary vision of Charles Deslondes. But the biggest impact would be the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution would be successful, and under the leadership of Charles General Jacques Jean Dessalines, they would establish their own legal framework to live under. And when you take their constitution, the original constitution of 1805, you see not a quantitative, but you see a qualitative difference between the two. You see, all the declarations and the laws that I illustrated earlier represented the class interest of the oppressor class. For the first time, the class interest of the majority is expressed in this Constitution. Much different than previous constitutions and declarations that expressed the class interest of the few. Now, if you were to take this Constitution, just lay it next to the U.S. Constitution and the Code Noir, you will see the qualitative difference. Now, the Constitution has many sections to it. For the sake of time, I took and chose some items to display, but all of it should be examined. The Constitution starts off with Article 1. The people inhabiting the island formerly called Saint Domingo hereby agree to form themselves into a free state, sovereign, and independent of any other power in the universe under the name of Empire Haiti. Article 2, slavery is forever abolished. Very clear, straightforward. Article 3, the citizens of Haiti are brothers at home. Equality in the eyes of the law is incontestably acknowledged, and there cannot exist any titles, advantages, or privileges other than those necessarily resulting from the consideration and reward of services to liberty and independence. Article 4, the law is the same to all, whether it punishes or whether it protects. No, this was not written by a student from Harvard University. Article 9, no person is worthy of being a Haitian who is not a good father, who is not a good son, who is not a good husband, and especially a good soldier. That's quite a statement. That's quite a statement. Expressing the quality of a human being, the morality of a human being. I don't think Prince Andrew is paying attention to this. Article 10. Fathers and mothers are not permitted to disinherit their children. This is written in the Constitution. Article 11. Every citizen must possess a mechanic art. Every citizen, every adult has to have the ability, the knowledge and training to work. To work. Not just to take care of their family, but to take care of society. Article 12. No white man of whatever nation he may be shall put his foot on this territory with the title of master or proprietor, neither shall he in the future acquire any property therein. Now, I know that a lot of people from the, what's that group called? Power Boys, and they say, see, they're racist, and black folks racist. At this time in history, there were no white people in Haiti, more than a handful that stood side to side, shoulder to shoulder with the oppressed Haitian people. There were none. There were numerically very few. Nothing is written, by the way, in stone that it will ever forever be that way. As time moves on, as progress is made, as people change, amendments come about in constitutions. So I'm saying that in case there are some people who feel offended. Now, the second part of the presentation, and if I go over, just signal to me to shut up. All right. Again, the aim of this revolt was to establish a second independent black republic with its own sovereign state. Now, Charles Deslondes and his team will come up with a plan. Their plan was this, basically. We must capture the city of New Orleans. It's the capital of the territory. If we are successful in capturing the territorial, the capital of the territory, then we can establish our own provisional government, establish our own legal framework. It will put us in position to emancipate all the enslaved people throughout the territory, creating a liberation center. As word spreads, because it's going to spread, the territory over here has been liberated. What can we predict the slaves in Alabama, Georgia, Florida do? They'll come here. They'll run. They'll run with zeal to get here, which would then theoretically put the American government in a difficult position. The American government would be forced to concede or go to war, send troops here. That was what was at stake. So had they been successful, their new legal framework would look something like this. They would have a section called Section 1, whereby they make it clear that in this section, it will provide the rights and protections of the newly freed. Number 1, chattel slavery is abolished forever. Number 2, no white man or woman can reside in the new republic, similar to what the influences got from Haiti. Number 3, no white person can kill or brutalize, whip, rape, etc., inflict any crime against the newly freed. Number 4, whites who kill or brutalize the former enslaved shall be subjected to punishment, jail, or given long sentences. Number 5, respect for equality of African or black women will be upheld. Article 6, the right to free speech, assembly, travel will be upheld. Passes that suppress travel will be banned. Article 7, freedom of African religions, but Catholicism is outlawed. Article 8, respect for freedom of African languages would not be limited to just the English. And Article 9, an army to protect the well-being of the newly freed will be established. So that's one section. Another section will provide for the social well-being of the newly freed. Plantations, land formerly owned by slave holders, shall become the property of the new republic. Article 2, a new economic relationship between the newly freed and the new republic shall be arranged to mitigate the monopoly of land ownership and the accumulation of individual wealth. Oh, poor Mr. Warren Buffett. Oh, my God. Oh, that man is in trouble. Article 3, an end to pregnant women working in the fields, especially up to the day of delivery and returning to the fields the next day after delivery, will come to an end. Number 4, amnesty, exoneration for runaways and maroons will be established. Another section, respect, make new arrangements with the formerly oppressed peoples. Article 1, just settlement or treaties with the indigenous peoples. Article 2, new agreements or arrangements with people of African descent outside the new Territory Republic, in the Caribbean, in Mother Africa. And number 3, restoration for those who seek to return to Africa. And last, symbolism, section 4. Article 1, remove oppressive symbols like the fleur-de-lis, the monuments of oppressors. Article 2, new symbols to highlight the new republic, installation of monuments, markers of Charles Deslondes, heroes, heroines of the revolution in public spaces. And Article 3, we're going to get us a new flag, which will probably be red and black. Now, I want you to understand how this was developed. Putting together this prospective legal constitution of Charles Deslondes, had they been successful, is a result of going back and studying the complaints, the aspirations, the criticisms expressed by the slaves. The New Orleans Tribune newspaper, which got started here July 1864, founded by Dr. Louis Charles Roudonnet, was indeed a champion for all people of color prior to his first paper, La Union. I see in the audience today we have the great-great-grandson visiting with us, Mr. Mark Charles Roudonnet. And young man, could you kindly stand for a second so people know who the hell you are? Good. You can't call him an elder, so I tell people when you get to 92, you all kind of things will be going on with you. All right? In that newspaper, there are very good articles that talk about the conditions the enslaved people suffer from. One of them was, there's an article that talks about how women up to the day of delivery were made to keep working in the sugarcane fields in St. Charles Parish. Have the baby, next day you're back out in the fields. Damn. My point is this. Even though the newspaper came about almost 50 years after 1811, it's going back, getting acquainted with documents and literary materials, we're able to add up the real aspirations of the enslaved, their real demands, their real hopes, and had they been successful, these things would be in their constitution. And this place called Louisiana would have a different name. I can't tell you what that name would be. Might be called New Africa. Remember France conquered this place and said it's called New France? I can't tell you what that could be. But it wouldn't be called Louisiana. Had they been successful, the expansion, southwest expansion of chattel slavery would have come to an end, because they would have had control of the mouth of the Mississippi River, where almost 42% of all world trade goes up and down the river. That's power. And it would put them in a position, a better position, to help emancipate their class brothers and sisters throughout the Caribbean and the rest of the black world. In closing, I conclude by saying this. These indeed were exceptional people, despite what textbooks like this would say about black people in general. These were women and men who understood that revolution is the only way to put an end to the domination of the exploiters. These were people who understood that the emancipation of the masses is the precondition for the emancipation of the individual. These were people who understood that great sacrifices are required for the oppressed to gain their complete freedom, people who willingly and courageously accepted these sacrifices. On behalf of the Louisiana Museum of African American History, ALMA, I thank Amistad Research Center, the Third Eye Theater, Interdisciplinary and Improvisational Performance Company, and Airlift for the opportunity to share these words with you.
To Mr. Waters and to Dr. Adderley for a wonderful conversation tonight. We do have a little bit of time for Q&A, so if you do have questions, just raise your hand and I'll circulate the mic around. Do ask that we do keep questions concise so that we can have time for everyone to participate. So does anyone have a question?
I have one question. As it relates to the 1811 slave revolt, and as it relates to Haiti and current day Haiti, would it have possibly been more beneficial for the revolters in the 1811 slave revolt to have an aim of amalgamation? As it relates to that slave revolt, I asked you about amalgamation due to the current state of Haiti. Would it be more economically beneficial, more educationally prosperous, and opportunities in general if Haiti were to collaborate with other ethnic groups, societies at large and abroad? So that's my question as it relates to this topic. Thank you.
If in my answer I don't satisfy answering your question, just say so. Because I'm not sure what you were saying in the beginning part of what you were saying. My understanding today is that the current conditions of Haiti has been, quote, reconquered by the oppressor class, okay? As you probably know, several years after the victory of Deslondes, France would come back and attempt to reconquer them, surround their island, threatening them with a naval bombardment, and a concession was made to prevent that from happening, which would have been a huge loss of life, to agree to repaying Haiti back all that France lost. And that will create a economic strangle on the Haitian people. Then over time, Haiti would suffer the rule by several despicable counter-revolutionary dictatorships, Papa Doc, his son, etc. But today, Haiti is no longer really controlled by the French state. It's really controlled by the U.S. And that the U.S., in collaboration, or rather a degree of political consultation with France and with Canada, or at this very minute negotiating who to put back into power in Haiti as the president. Now, that's not the idea of that the people decide. That's off the table. It's always been off the table. So if your point is, or if your question is, should Haiti currently today cooperate with those that are really in power making the decisions? If that's what your question, I would say no, they shouldn't. What is needed in Haiti, in my political opinion, Haiti needs its own independent revolutionary organization that can rebuild the revolutionary movement in Haiti with the aim of gaining complete independence from these outside oppressive states, especially the U.S. That's what's needed there in order for those people to be completely emancipated. So I don't know if that really answers your question, because I couldn't understand the first part.
Well, that definitely answered the question. There was just one part that was left out. In terms of amalgamation.
Oh, say that word again.
Amalgamation.
What is?
Amalgamation.
Oh.
Blending into, say for example, two historical nonprofit organizations were to partner and merge as one. However, even if there is a partnership, there's always a 51%, there's 51% on one side, there's 49% on one side. Sometimes it could be 60-40, sometimes it could be 70-30, or either 50-50. But in the business, as it relates to amalgamation, in the business perspective, would it be still constitutional savvy for the country of Haiti to remain 51% shareholder or 60% shareholder compared to 40 to collaborate economically with a country, just say hypothetically France or the US or Canada, as it relates to the prosperity with the economic and the financial burden that Haiti has on itself? Similar to how the 1811 slavery revolt aim was to particularly be independent, completely separately ran and governed by itself. But as we look at how Haiti is in its current state of today, with an amalgamation, should that be removed from the table, not excluding Haiti from continuing to be completely independent, but a 51% shareholder or 70%, in that particular regard? That was the only part that was left out.
Well, my answer to that would be this. You would have to tell me, what is the aim of this arrangement? Is the aim for this arrangement to further the complete emancipation of Haiti? I would think if it's not, I would say, why use that tactic? If its aim is to further emancipate completely Haiti, I would tend to doubt that it's feasible, because agreements have to be enforced, and usually enforced by force. So I'm a little taken back. I'm trying to grasp what's the validity now of the question.
If I could have one comment to something that we can all think about. Mr. Waters laid out for us the power of ownership classes in the 1700s and 1800s in having a long plan and laying out their rights and the terms on which they expected the world to be conducted. This is not my expertise, and maybe in some future conversations in color we can bring some political scientists to the table, but there is a whole other class of people out there that are controlling Haiti. And this is this whole sort of development and aid class that we want to think of as non-governmental actors, somehow kind of independent of the way power functions, but they're their own actors beholden, and it is, so I respect your thinking in trying to think about sort of what are the paths forward in Haiti, but the powerful forces arrayed against Haiti they have many heads.
Hello, my name is Marita Poole, and I am the director of Newcomb Art Museum at Tulane University. I was really struck, Dr. Adderley, by the book that you showed us that that was hidden and from 1943 by the cover, which had a sculpture by John Quincy Adams Ward that was created a few years after the Emancipation Proclamation, entitled The Freedman. And my question, which is actually to both of you, is in light of artistic endeavors that happen in the 20th and 21st century, whether it's the literary, from neo-slave narratives or works by people like Margaret Walker, Toni Morrison, most recently Colson Whitehead, as well as visual artists, do you get the sense that there has been more of a transformation in understanding these histories than there was when you first started this research? Or, and if not, part two is, to what extent do you think artists can play a role in transforming understanding of these histories?
I'll give a quick answer and then let Mr. Waters answer. I'm concerned not with the will of the artists, but when I think of Kara Walker's A Subtlety, which is this gigantic sugar sculpture that was literally designed to call precisely to mind not just the history of Black enslavement, but of modern 21st century US corporate capitalism as the child, the creature, the perpetuation of the thing. And the whole, like her whole vision with the very scale of it. And people were like, oh, there's Kara Walker talking about slavery in the past again. Like, that's the way the public ran with the narrative. And that's, I think so that's what gives me pause, is that, you know, she made what I think almost literally the biggest and loudest statement about the relationship between this history and this capitalism. And people were like, oh, slavery was so terrible. And that's, so yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I want it to be more effective in opening that conversation, but I was incredibly frustrated.
Well, I think there's been progress. When I say progress, I mean that there's been more Black people producing, publishing literary works, novels, history, art. There's been numerically more of that, especially in the last 40 some odd years. There's been very little when it gets to Blacks playing an important literary role when it comes to political questions, social history. There's not, in my opinion, much of that. And the reason why I think there's not much of that is because there is going on today a major assault against the whole field of writing, which I analyze to be the fear of allowing Black people to write on subjects that are even more serious: revolutionary thought, hidden history, political exposures. So we don't want them to get into that area. So let's begin now a campaign to stop that from happening. 2 weeks ago, the London Times reported the beloved country of Queen Elizabeth. We're now introducing resolutions to take all books out of Great Britain's libraries to deal with not just the subjects. I mean, the subjects quote are dangerous subjects, just ordinary stuff. We don't want the young people to any more getting introduced to this. In the United States, we have the assault coming in the form of the critical race theory. Don't discuss this. Texas is probably the leading state where they're trying to get humanities out of this curriculum. Humanities is all about thinking. You don't need to learn Aristotle. You need to know Plato. You just need how to push this daggone button so I can make some money. I mean, that's really the thrust. So it's not important to learn philosophy. It's not important to learn these things because you might accidentally develop critical thinking skills, and we're going to be in trouble. You develop critical thinking skills, you're going to be seeing how I'm stealing from you. So I think there's been some progress, but there's a whole lot more we have to go, and I think that's going to be kind of get held back with this U.S. and European onslaught. No, we're going to stop this. And that's something I think we should resist.
I have Monique and the gentleman back here.
Thank you for that answer. I would actually like to add a little bit to that because I am living as an artist. And so how can you understand a haiku poem if you do not know your ABCs? The foundation is the understanding of the history. Not only, you cannot progress to grade 2 without passing through grade 1. And so the fundamentals are the prerequisite to understanding higher analytics. The art form is intended to be a secondary language of sorts. It's not the primary language. It is often encoded language, subliminal language, abstracted language, non-literal language. But for me, the answer is, without understanding the ABCs, you will not understand the rest.
Thank you, Mr. Waters, and Dr. Adderley. My name is Willie Birch. They tell me I'm pretty well known here. I'm a visual artist, and I feel I do make relevant work that people, particularly people who look like me, can understand. And I think that art is a subversive act, and we have to figure out how we code it and what we code it with. New Orleans is a wonderful place in terms of its history because if you look at just the fences in the French Quarter, or the ironworks, or just the Moorish architecture, these are all symbols. Let's take the St. Louis Cathedral. What's at the top of St. Louis Cathedral? You have two diamond shapes. Congo. We have enough signature here to teach the world the history of black people and the power of who we are. In terms of, it's the first time I've seen you. I haven't visited Amistad in a while, but I hope I can talk to you at some point, young lady. The deal is that there are some of us here, visual artists, who are beginning to challenge the system. What's missing is writers. We haven't developed enough writers who can articulate. It's always going to be difficult for us to publish a lot of the things that people like me do, but I like to think that some of this is getting out there. And the way I work is a way that it can be seen on an intellectual level, supposedly, but it also can be seen on an everyday narrative storytelling level. But that's as an artist. One of the people who were my mentors in the civil rights movement was Aretha Castle Haley. And she used to always say to me when she first saw me at 18, she said, "Willie, the artists have one foot in poverty and one foot in aristocracy. The people with the money are not going to give you enough money to really expose the beauty and the strength of what you're doing. But the point is that because of who you are, that's what you must continue to do, and the people will support you. It may be red beans and rice, but they will support you." So I'm saying that we need to develop people who understand the symbolism, the iconography in terms of what we do, and begin to write about that, and hopefully we get Tulane, I understand, like Midlow Hall Center, Dillard, Xavier would be better. SUNO would be great. As a former graduate of SUNO, we got some problems. The point is that Amistad is important in terms of beginning to write and encourage our kids, our children, to read. So can we create writing seminars? Can we create just ways of visiting the institutions that we do have? But again, I don't want to just random on and on because I could talk all night. The beauty is that things are moving forward, not as fast as you and I are. We are on the downside. I'm going on 80 years old. So, but the point is that there is and will be enough information, I like to think, particularly of people like me, that future scholars, particularly young people who believe in what we do, can articulate and begin to disseminate. This is our history. It's always been. And we just have to do more of that so that we will grasp a further appreciation and understanding of who we are as human beings.
I just want to make an announcement because I don't think she will do it for herself. Tulane Newcomb Art Museum has just hired an arts writer and editor for 2 years funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and she is here tonight to begin this very work, and her name is Sheree Rimpsey, and she is in the room. I just wanted to make that known to the audience.
And Mr. Birch, thank you for everything you're doing with everything. So we're going to do one more question. I'm sure we could spend all night here with multiple questions, but we always have to cut it off at some point. So we'll make this the last question for this evening.
Marion Moore, I hope is a quick question, I am old enough where I think I had a version of that textbook, the Louisiana history textbook. That was my textbook. So I am wondering, since I don't have kids, what are kids learning now? I mean, what are kids I had that in, I guess, 6th or 7th grade. What are kids in that grade learning? What are kids in high school learning? Is it any better now, or I expect college they would be learning something in college, but you have to have the basics first. So are they learning anything in?
Well, my answer to that is it's a little bit more, but not significantly more. One of the things our organization does is collect textbooks. So we have textbooks from 1930 that they were used in a classroom, and we have textbooks from 2016. And when we compare those books to today's book, the word African American has replaced the word Negro. But those books now use the term African American maybe 15 times in a 300-page book, okay? All right. They also have one page, not the full page, 2/3 of the page, that gives some information that the 1811 revolt happened in Louisiana. It doesn't state the aim. It just simply states it happens. It's about 500 people showed up, 500 people were in the revolt, and that's about it. It's somewhere about 2 paragraphs. So we've progressed from 1935 book I have here to what we have today. It's a little bit of more, but actually it's not significantly much more.
I think too, the thing that strikes me, and I get this from only getting students in my classroom, I don't study textbooks, is the romanticization of colonizers. It is unchanged. All right, and I think it's worse in Louisiana because it's so easy to romanticize Frenchness. All right, this was invasion and tyranny, and I don't care how many beautiful things there might or might not be in France at any given moment. That just the casual romanticization of the invader, all right, and the abuser, it is persistent, and periodically, I should just tell my students to do it periodically. I did have a student about 10 years ago who went and looked, sort of both, I think it was what textbooks were used in parishes in Louisiana and counties in Texas. And things are mentioned, but what is at fault with the system that I think what Mr. Waters said about the way that the U.S. Constitution, all right, is a series of compromises amongst an oppressor class. That is both a political statement and a factual one. And I think we should all be vigilant and concerned. I don't have kids either, and I'd always every so often a parent will put something on the internet now, something that's completely outrageous. But I think the problem with that is it distracts us from the way that the narrative exactly is remarkably the overall narrative of the goodness of what was formed in what is now the United States. I do have a tiny bit of hope, and I do want to uplift one of my students. I had a student who was a distant descendant of the slave captors Andry's, who she said her father's been determined that they try to not so much disown it because it is their history, but who wrote her a final essay for me about why we are so uncritical of Claiborne Avenue. That we're so eager now, like, oh look, we've gotten rid of Confederate whatevers, and so that I do think there are students out there, and this is a second-year student, that are reading differently into Mr. Birch's point in terms of what we can do to nurture that, and to your point, what we can do to nurture those skills. And it is a political act when the state and the federal government undermine our ability to do that. Certainly, wealthy institutions like the one I work for can do more than their share, but the undermining and the devaluing of those skills, of the humanities, that's a political act, all right? That's not about not wanting people to get a job. I want, people to earn a living, but that is a political act, and that's one of that we have to, we need to spend some time fighting.
And in my role, I'd be remiss, we're talking about education, to encourage anyone to explore Amistad on the Go, which is Amistad's free online educational platform that's connected to our website. Before we close this evening, again, this is the first of 3 talks that will be taking place this month. I encourage you to join us again next Wednesday, same time and same place, for Freddie Evans and Dr. Joyce Jackson from LSU, talking about new research and educational programming related to Congo Square. And then finally, on September 28th, we'll have artist Katrina Andry and art curator and historian Dr. Moray Beauchamp-Bird, talking about a conversation about healing in African American art, and specifically in Katrina Andry's work. So I hope you can join us for those talks as well. Again, I'd like to thank the Jazz and Heritage Center for hosting us tonight. I would like to thank our collaborators, Third Eye Theater and New Orleans Airlift. Thanks to the sponsorship of Louisiana Endowment for the Arts, and let's give a big hand for our speakers and thank them again tonight.